sound? Okay. We are on 13 and 14. I keep asking this, but I'm not sure that the hard copy matches with the online copy. Does it? Pretty much. So last week, just to read some of the Chinese, we did the opening, which would have been on the bottom of 12, Manjushri, asking virtuous leader Bodhisattva, although the thus come one's enlightened to only one Dharma, why did they explain innumerable Dharmas? Okay. And then this breaks down into, well, but we didn't read the Chinese on that, did we? I'm sure you all remember this really clearly. Okay, that are sure. That could, the first two characters there, are sure. Got it? We read that in Chinese? Oh. Okay. How far did we read in Chinese? We certainly didn't read the whole thing. You would have been aching to hear my Chinese after that long. No? Okay. Let's go down then into this a little deeper. Basically, just let's run through the English really quickly here. Starting with our sure, that can be then. It's literally, they translate at that time, but it means then. And when you're dealing with a text like this, the Avatamsaka, the then is very elusive whenever this is taking place. It could be right now. It could be in the past. Anyhow, what you have here is that Manjushri Bodhisattva is asking virtuous leader, and then he says, disciples of the Buddha, disciple of the Buddha. All the thus comes awaken only one Dharma. Why do they then explain innumerable Dharmas? Why do they appear in innumerable Buddha lands? Why do they transform innumerable sentient beings? Why do they expound with innumerable, or explain, with innumerable different sounds? Why do they manifest innumerable bodies? How do they know the innumerable minds? Why do they demonstrate innumerable spiritual penetrations? How can they universally cause innumerable worlds to quake? How can they display innumerable exquisite ornaments? And how can they manifest an infinite variety of states of being, when none of these distinctions exist within the Dharma nature? And then if we want to, you see, the first one started with our sure. Now we just have sure. So it doesn't have to be, sorry, I got to take a minute here. My computer wants to make sure I'm me, and I'm not some hacker. Okay, I think it's satisfied. So here we have sure. Let's try this then. 得说菩萨应诵大约佛子所往意，深深难可了，智者能知此，常要佛功德. So this I really like this passage. He starts up by saying, you're asking about the states of Buddhas, fully enlightened beings. And it's very, very difficult to fathom this. It said that the Arhat doesn't know the state of the Bodhisattva doesn't know the state of the Buddha, the ordinary person doesn't know the state of the Arhat, and so forth. So it's not something even if we hear the words, we would understand the meaning, because most of this is something that is seen directly, often without words. And so even if it could be put into words, fathoming that, and fathom means to really, really get it, really capture it, this would be very, very difficult. And yet, associated with that is this line which I really delight in. They're able to know this, and then they find constant joy in these virtuous states of mind. This is often, I've said this many times, but often when people start studying Buddhism, they start with the Four Truths, and the first is the truth of suffering, or dukkha. But in fact, that's not the most important element. The most important element is this last line. They find constant joy in the Buddha's virtues. This is the real, if you want to say reward, or the real deliverance of cultivating in this way. The suffering and the origin of suffering and so forth, these are often presented only to break people out of a kind of dreamy attachment to what they call sensory existence, a kind of chasing after conditioned dharmas as if they were real. They say born drunk and dying in a dream, this kind of state. And so I use the analogy, sometimes they have anicca, anatta, and dukkha as one of the three of the four signs. And it's sort of like, for those who are drunk and dreaming, the Buddha prescribes sobering medicines. So it's like when you go to the eye doctor and you put the glasses on and they slip in and out different lenses, and it's a little foggy, clear. So when you go in, you probably have pretty occluded eyesight. The Buddha slips on the glasses, and then he slips in impermanence. You go, oh, everything's impermanent. That's real. I didn't see that before. Oh, boom, slips another one. Everything is insubstantial. It doesn't have a self-existing nature. It's in constant flux. Whoa. And then the other one, that sucks. Well, that's suffering. Okay, so by slipping these lenses in, a borrowed awakening with these concepts allows someone to break through the drunken dreaming state, but this doesn't necessarily bring to the constant joy. It's only after one lets go of the false that the truth starts to be able to manifest. So often the negativity or the contemplations that are of impurity, of impermanence, and insubstantiality are not necessarily the reward. They're merely expedients to get an opening to let go of something. And sometimes these don't come through, often they don't come through the teachings, they come through life experience. There's not a single day that doesn't go by that we don't experience either deeply or superficially some sense of impermanence, insubstantial nature of things, and a kind of dissatisfaction, a gnawing angst that things are not what I wish them to be, they could be, or hope them to be, and even if I get to that, they slip away. So this constant state of unsatisfactoriness is what is being talked about. But again, what I'm pointing out here, it's really important to understand that that's only the beginning. And you'll see this in the Pali text as well. When the cultivators begin to cultivate, there's a certain disaffection, they call it, even to the point of almost a kind of alienation and even nausea with life, the uncultivated, unawakened life, just day-to-day trotting on, getting older, and so on and so forth, and dying and getting sick and so forth. This, even if it's 19 or 20 years old, when they start to see it, it often is preceded by or accompanied by a kind of alienation. Sometimes people would use the word anomie. It's a sociological term, a kind of not disassociation, but a kind of separation from what I'm doing, what I'm looking forward to, how I'm just sort of carrying on my life as going through the routine. Anyhow, and then he goes on to here, and he uses a series. One of the reasons they use metaphors and analogies is because it's so profound and difficult to fathom. So they take something we can understand and then bridge it over to what we can't. So here you have a series of analogies that the earth is of a single nature that allows sentient beings upon it, allows them to be in their individuality without thoughts of difference on the part of the earth. All Buddhist dharmas are the same way. And then it goes into, let's see what the pattern is, your analogies. Fire, earth, sea, water, and waves, wind, thunderclouds, locale, all of these verses, then sun and moon and finding Brahma Lord. So there's 10 analogies or 10 metaphors to try to explain the very basic question. And what's the very basic question that's asked? Basically, why is it when Buddhas teach, speak, manifest, proclaim, they don't speak only one dharma, but they speak limitless many different ones. And this could refer to all the different texts that are brought. We see that the texts were compiled as part of an oral tradition where the Buddha wandered and spoke at many different occasions, did not write anything down. It is very critical. So the speaking here was the primary mode of transmission, and it was always lively and dialogical and engaged. And often when you read the text, you'll say at this time, in this place, could be Sarasvati, it could be the Jada Grove, it could be a palace of some sort. There was a gathering of, and it tells you who was there. And that gives you the context for the teaching that's given. So the limitlessly is meaning that in one assembly with one group of people, one thing is said. In another assembly with another group of people, something else is said. And even more particularly in individuals. So like the Vajra Sutra is really having a conversation with Subhuti. The Shurangama Sutra is having a specific conversation challenge with who? Ananda, right. So the Lotus Sutra is having an extended exchange with primarily Shariputra and others. So it could be many, it could be one. At the same time, we know that those assembled are listening in and getting it as well. Now, it may be that one's the foil for this. They say Ananda's a foil. Everybody else is like, I'm glad I'm not sitting there getting grilled by the Buddha. But they're listening in very carefully because they're probably in the same state of mind. Sometimes, and this is a very interesting phenomenon too, the limitless many different ones, there's sections of text in the 12 divisions of the canon that have never been spoken before, yet to come. So that's what I mentioned last week about having an open canon. But there's some that are spoken not upon without request. So usually there's some request given. Somebody will start with a question, or there's a situation, or something happens. Often the monks or nuns will come to the Buddha and say, so-and-so did this, is that okay, is that good? And so on and so forth, and the Buddha will speak. But in some occasions, for example, in the Shurangama, the last section on the 50 skanda states is not spoken upon request. Nobody knew to ask that. This is so when you go back, it's profound and difficult to fathom. Often what's happening is the Buddha speaking a little bit ahead of the capacity of the audience. This is very interesting. So it gets recorded, but it's not as if anybody in the audience asked it or even necessarily thought about it. So it's interesting in the Shurangama, he lays down the basics of investigating the mind. He corrects, Ananda's mistakes. And then he goes into this last section and he says, when you engage in this deeply, this could happen as you go through the 5 skandhas in your meditation states. And if this happens, here's what you should do. So it's almost like a medicine or a prescription that's given in advance of the illness. I don't know how else to describe. The only situation I can even come close to with that was, I told you the story, but I'll tell you it again. So on the bowing pilgrimage, we're starting out, and somewhere, in the first month or so, Master Wa gives me a little plastic jar of herbs, medicinal herbs. And I'm like, well, I'm okay. What's this for? I don't know what this is for. And it didn't have any instructions on it. It was just, he says, this might come in handy. Okay? Now, 8-9 months later, we're bowing, and somebody makes an offering of LSD and something else, and I woo, and something toxic in the food as well. And so I shouldn't have accepted the offering. I accepted the offering. It was a mistake, my bad. Nonetheless, I got really sick. And I was just tortured in my sleep and at night in my dreams and whatnot, and woke up with all this kind of stuff. You know, this is the stuff of ER. And somebody says, well, why didn't you call ER? Because we didn't have cell phones then? What? No, you had to find a pay phone. You know what pay phones? These are the little boxes with phones on. You put money in. It's like, some people here know what pay phones are, but some people don't. So anyhow, I was doing my morning meditation, really just bent over in pain. And for some reason, into my head, I saw that thing of herbs. I thought, wow, why am I thinking of that? Why is that coming in my head now? And then I thought, where did I put it? Where did I put it? So Heng Sure is sitting there. I'm scrambling through and it was under the front seat of the car. And I reach under, and there's this thing of herbs. And I go, well, why not? So I pop a few in. Within 40 minutes, everything was okay again. So here's a case in point that I didn't know what that was for. I didn't ask for it. There was no request. And yet, it came in very handy at a particular time in the future. So you could also see this that way for yourselves. There might be passages in this text that immediately resonate with you, and you can kind of, quote, take home and use right now. There may be other passages of the text that don't quite. You don't get it. But let it go in. Just let a seed of it be planted. And sometime in the future, this thing will open up. And sometimes it'll open up spontaneously, or you read it again 5-6 years down the road, and suddenly what didn't make sense then suddenly makes sense. The text hasn't changed, so it's the receiver that's changed. And that's where it requires a certain patience. And this is why many people memorize text as if to absorb that, with the possibility that all those seeds are there, and when external conditions or internal conditions shift, suddenly there's a connection, and principles and specifics unite, and you're taken to a new plateau. So the question basically is this one: why is there so many different ones? And why the sentient beings they teach are so limitlessly many, and they teach and transform all these different sentient beings, and they use all these different sounds, all these different expedients, all these different bodies. Remember, I mentioned Earth Store Sutra last week, how Earth Store says he or she can manifest not only as a male or female, as a teacher, as a king, as a prince, as an official, and then as a lake, as a meadow, as a pure natural abode, to cause beings in their various susceptibilities or resonances to have some awakening experience. This one I can understand, and it's, if you look at many of the famous monasteries, were in forests, or in mountains, or in deep valleys, and still are being set up there, because there's something about nature that causes spiritual awakening, for want of a better word, regardless of you have even if you're not a Buddhist or a Christian or anything, that natural encounter somehow stirs something. And of course, they're doing the science on this now and discovering there's a lot of truth to what, people for generations going back, to the time of the Buddha understood. In fact, you'll notice that when the Buddha first went out, he went to a forest area where he found fellow cultivators. Now, one, the rent's cheap, so that's a good deal. And if you're really cultivating, holding down a job can be an obstacle. So there's that, but there's also this freedom from the distractions. The distractions, of course, are made from the mind, but unless you separate from them, you're not able to see it's your mind that's making the distractions. For example, you go to Redwood Vihar or you go to Buddha Root Farm, and you're sitting in the redwoods and the trees, and all of a sudden you realize all these thoughts and things are fluffing up, and there's all these distractions. Where are they coming from? They're not there and outside. You brought them with you. So you got them all in tapes, or I guess that's old. Tapes are old. What is it? You got flash drives or whatever into your eighth consciousness, or your sixth and seventh, eighth consciousness. And when you sit, all those come up and you realize, I made those. I made those connections. I projected and made all those images and whatnot. And even when they're not around me. But that's the good thing. You think, well, then my meditation's not working. But actually it is working because it's showing you, so to speak, the contents of your vacuum cleaner, of your mind. And that seeing them when they're not there externally, it lets you see, oh my gosh, these are things I've created and attached to and so forth, and allows you to let go of them. So it's pretty interesting. Okay, moving on a little bit. If you take a chance to look back, because I'm trying to point out there's a very interesting pattern here. This one, the one before, and then one that follows on 10, 10, 10, okay? There's 10 questions, 10 verses. It follows, there's a question, there's an answer, and then there's analogies and metaphors used to explain. For example, in the one before, it starts with, disciple of the Buddha, all sentient beings alike are composed of the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water. They're devoid of a self or anything pertaining to a self. There's not a real self there. There's just this imagined thing, but it's really just a process of the five skandhas going through changes and transformation. There's no solid me or mine there. Why then do they undergo suffering? Some get bliss, some are respectable, and so forth. So he starts with, and he says it's karma. He said the answer there is, according to what is done, appropriate consequences are born. The doer is without any, permanent being. That's what all Buddhas say. And now the pattern repeats. So it's very interesting. It's almost like karma in manifold, multiple ways has created all these different kinds of beings, us. And therefore, even though the Dharma, now in the next section is, even though the Dharma is one Dharma that all Buddhas awaken to, it also proliferates into all these different facets to respond to the karma that's created by different beings. So it's reciprocity. It's like sound and echo that's going on, mirror and image. So they explain all of these to meet with all those different potentials. I'll read this again because it's really a really good, someone read it in class this last week. It's from the Platform Sutra. But Huineng is asking, or kind of dealing with the same issue. He says, this teaching of ours, what he calls our teaching, 84,000 wisdoms flow from one prajna. So one Dharma, we have 84,000 in this series of verses here, all the different kinds. He doesn't enumerate, but if you did footnotes, you would go through almost every text in all the different canons and say all of these is one of the dharmas that is spoken or brought forth. We don't do that. We just use 84,000. Why? And again, going back to the first 10 verses, because people have 84,000 times of whanau or klesha, roughly translated as afflictions. And these are mental and emotional, physical, and even intellectual positions or negative aspects of personality and whatnot that impede bodhi. It could be the big ones: greed, anger, pride, doubt. But then you go into laziness, jealousy, envy, covetousness, stinginess, and so on and so forth, and wrong views that say I deny cause and effect or something that impedes bodhi. Anyhow, he says, good and wise friends, the sutras and the writings of the great and small vehicles and the 12 divisions of the canon were all established because of people. So this is going right to this verse. Why are all these dharmas? Not for devas necessarily, they're established for people. They're made for people, and could only be set up because people have the potential to respond to them. what he calls their wisdom nature. Without that nature, that potential, that capacity, these would have no place to catch. So there's a very interesting thing. It's a little bit above, a little bit beyond, and yet it's at the same time extremely suitable and appropriate for us, even though it might hurt a little to hear it, or it might rub the wrong way. How does it go? Bitter medicine can be bitter. This is Chinese medicine, of course. Bitter medicine, a good medicine, bitter to the taste. True words can be harsh on the ears, or the heart, or the ego. I don't think the ears is the right one there. Anyhow, then it says this very powerful line, if there were no people in the world, all the myriad Dharma teachings would not exist by themselves. This is really, really critical, because what it's saying then, there is an absolute total correlation between people, living beings, and dharmas. It's not like dharmas precede. Dharmas are actually a response to the afflictions, the sufferings of living beings. So this is why it's not really, I don't call it a doctrine. I wouldn't call it a doctrine. Now, the metaphor that's often used is medicine. Comes out of a number of sutras, including the Lotus Sutra, basically saying these enlightened beings are like skilled physicians, and they diagnosed, patients come, they diagnose the illness, and they prescribe various medicines to counteract that illness. And once the illness is cured, the medicine is no longer relevant. So the Dharma then is not something that is necessarily even a belief. It's more like it's a method or an exercise. It's more like something you eat. And basically what it's describing is conditions, the conditions of the human, and then giving prescriptions for the conditions that are not conducive to wholeness and healthiness, wellness, fullness, awakening. So the Buddha, by definition, is awakened to, one who awakens. It's not one who proclaims necessarily. It's really interesting that, and it's not a name, it's an adjective. So there's, like this text, there's lots of awakened ones who are called then Buddhas. So sometimes I prefer actually to use a small b than the capital B, because it's referring to this capacity that is prolific among beings. And what they do is they don't conjecture, they don't speculate, they don't even philosophize. What they're doing is merely reading conditions and responding appropriately and restoring what they call the original nature or the true nature to people. So this is the method. The one that's used very, very skillfully, did I mention it last week? It came up again this week in class, the raft. You all know the parable? It's called the parable of the raft. No? Parable of the raft? If you got to drop your mask, though, otherwise I can't. It's in the project. It's also in the water snake simile, Aligama Buddhama, if I could pronounce it right, Pali Sutra. So it's in both traditions. Yeah. Do I need to repeat it, or can I pass it on? Don't need to repeat, everybody knows it? You can do India, this way or that way, I don't care. It's something, just let me know. Okay, basically, I'll do it really quickly. Buddha's on one, says if you're on one shore, and it's a very dangerous shore, and there's all kinds of alligators and snakes, tax collectors, politicians, whatever, okay, and you really want to get off that shore, and there's no ferry, there is no boat, there's not even one of these things we have up in Maine, you stand on, you paddle now. We used to do kayaks and canoes. Now the big thing is these, what are they called? Flat boards, so you stand on and balance. What are they called? Yeah, paddle boards. Yeah, that's, okay. So there's not even those. There's nothing. All there is some sticks, maybe bamboo, and I said to his disciples, what you do? He said, bind it all together. They said, bind it together. If it hopefully just half-ass floats, Get on it and paddle your butt off until you get to the other shore. Don't worry that you're taking in water. Don't even worry it's sinking a little. As long as it keeps you afloat till you can get to the other shore. And when you get to the other shore, what should you do? Should you just worship it, bow to it, carry it around on your shoulder? No, he says, it served its purpose. Let it go. Same way he says, my dharma is this way. You pick it up expedient to get from one shore of confusion and unawakened to the other shore. Once you're on the other shore, you can let go of it. He says, so therefore, you should not cling after it's served its purpose to dharma. He says, moreover, you should not cling to adharmas, that which is not dharma. So he's saying, put down everything that's false, but even when you have the true, that is only serving to get you trued. Once you are trued, ED, you don't need the true anymore. Now the trick is to know when that point comes. You can overestimate and say, I'm almost there, and you jump off the raft within 5 feet, and an alligator gets you, or quicksand pulls you under. So that's often where teachers come in. They say, okay, you've arrived. You can let the raft go. But sometimes you get impatient. You want to just get off and swim the rest of the way, but the current can carry you away. You didn't judge the current, you know, all these metaphors. Anyway, this also matches a very, this teachings is coming out of the Prajnaparamita tradition, which is basically saying, expressing the emptiness phenomena, noumena of emptiness. But emptiness doesn't mean void and lack. It means there's nothing in the way anymore. And so, ironically, it's a fullness. And that's why it's called true emptiness is wondrous existence, because there's no impediments anymore. Because you've seen and understood everything has no nature of its own, within that understanding comes a liberating fullness of being. And that's how the texts describe it. So it's really coming back to that essential point. This is all the Prajnaparamita texts. What are the Prajnaparamita texts? You mentioned the Vajra, Prajnaparamita. The Heart Sutra is a Paramita text. What else? There's a great one with 8,000 verses. Lankavatara is Prajna. Vimalakirti is Prajna. Wainung, the Sixth Patriarch Sutra, is Prajnaparamita. So there's a number, and they all come back to this really profound, deep point that is the basis for saying that you can pick it up, you must pick it up, but you also pick it up to use it. To use it. See, they're not stones or tablets. They're sort of fluid medicinal toys or devices that you use. Actually, the best definition I heard is that they aren't just teachings, because teachings with capital T then turns into a body of doctrines. But they're transformative teachings. In other words, they only teach if they're used to transform. If you're not using them to transform, they're not teachings. They're something else. So this is quite important. That's why and even if there's sort of a belief, and there is belief, I don't want to misstate that. You'll see mentions of Shraddha, which is Sanskrit for faith, trust, confidence, belief. But these are always presented as operative and not final. So even if it says in the Avatamsaka, faith is a source of the way, it's not the end of the way. The end of the way is gnosis, it's understanding, it's wisdom. Then faith has delivered, it's operative, it takes you to understanding. But it doesn't take the place of understanding. So where you have faith and belief, it's sort of a habit of state of mind of trust and confidence placed in something like a person or these teachings, but they're only a hypothesis. So faith is really a hypothesis. You start out and say, I'm going to experiment, I'm going to test this and see, does it in fact deliver something? But I'm not going to just stay in there and say, I believe this. That's like sitting down for lunch and saying, I believe in food. Okay. I believe in sleep, and you stay awake all night. No, it's not. it shows itself through the eating, through the sleeping, and so on and so forth. That's why they say it's like eating, sleeping, and wearing clothes. The Dharma is just this way. So this passage I wanted to share with you is really, we're working on now. We're almost done with the Hanshan Wandering in a Dream text. You know, I don't want to tell you how long we've been working on this, but we're in the last, we should finish it up this Sunday. But here's a section from it where Hanshan starts. He says, Buddhas come into this world, employ thousands of words and phrases. This is just matching the text we're reading, right? And devise skillful, appropriate expedients, including Chan and Zen, recitation, precepts, formal study, and even esoteric, mudras, mandalas, mantras, all to match living beings' potentials. You can see the exact matchup. There's no reason to create these if they don't match living beings' potentials. Yet, each and every technique, and this is very interesting, each and every technique, each and every dharma is a technique, is designed only to break living beings' attachments. Actually, there's no actual dharma to give people. This is right from Hanshan. So this is, going back to the rap, going back to this passage here, it's very fluid and very expedient. At the same time, it has to be done, I don't know how to say that, it's not just doing it, but it's how it's done. For example, you can recite, and you can recite all day long, or you can memorize text, or you can sit on a cushion or something for hour after hour after hour. But without a certain mentality, without a certain intent, the text says it's like cooking sand hoping to get rice. So an effort without some kind of intentionality. And what's the intentionality? The intentionality, as far as I understand it, is to become the best person you can possibly become. And that's why it said, when the way or the path of being a person is perfected, Buddhahood accomplishes itself. So it's not like you're seeking other power, miraculous responses from your practices, but you're using your practices to transform your heart and your mind, your habits and your emotions to become. And basically becoming the best person that's possible is actually called anashrava. In Sanskrit, it means without any more afflictions, without any more outflows. So the markers of this are not that you see something mystical or lotuses, float around the air in front of you or anything like this. Is all your character flaws and bad habits, are they getting less? Is there less temper, less greed, less anger, less jealousy, and so on and so forth? That's a measure of whether the practice is working. So again, let me quote Huineng. He says, Maha Prajna Paramita. So he goes, the great perfection of wisdom. That's a Sanskrit name which means great wisdom that goes to the other shore. See the other shore of the raft? Yeah, and there we go. This must be practiced with the mind-heart and not merely recited by the mouth. Verbal repetition without mind-heart cultivation is like a fantasy, a hallucination, as dewdrops and a lightning flash. Now normally this is said, they use these, like dreams, illusions, bubbles, shadows, lightning flash are used to describe conditioned dharmas. He's using it here to say verbal repetition without heart-mind cultivation, rectification, is like these. If, however, while the mouth recites, the mind-heart cultivates, practices, really does it, then both mouth and mind and heart are in accord, and one's own essential nature is Buddha. Apart from this, there is no other Buddha. So he is really driving the point home. And of course, the text goes on now to using seawater and waves to describe this. You can work through this, I think, on your own. You can say, for example, the wind. One wind can blow with varying forces through the grass and trees on the myriad things that exist in nature. So the wind is of one nature, but it can be strong, it can be weak, it can be just a little zephyr, it can be a tornado or hurricane. It has one essence to it, but it manifests in all these different ways. He used the same thing like waters. The waves are not all the same. There's big waves, there's small waves, there's waves in front, waves in back. There are all kinds of waves. However, the water is identical and undifferentiated in its nature. So he's using this, he's saying that's the nature of the Buddha Dharmas. It's a one, but it manifests differently according to what's needed. The rain is a really good one that he uses thunderclouds, but it's like rain. Each drop of rain basically is different, like each snowflake. I don't know, anybody did the experiment? You catch snowflakes and it said no two snowflakes are the same. That's not a bad way to spend a day, you know. When I'm in Wisconsin, it's like Robert Frost says, I climb to the top of a birch tree and then it bends over and brings me back to the ground again. And then I go back and I climb to the birch tree and it bends over and leads me down to the ground. And he said, not a bad way to live a life. He said, one could do worse than be a swinger of birches. And I would say one could do worse than be a chaser of snowflakes. How is it any different than the money you chase? They both evaporate. And the things you buy with it evaporate too, but I don't want to go there. Anyhow, the vegetation, though, that responds to the rain, some absorb more, some absorb less, but each one takes in basically what it can handle. They absorb according to their capacity. It's not that the rain portions itself out. So there's this natural reciprocity that's going between the teachings and the responsiveness of the individual. And a really good teacher is able to very almost surgically match that point that you need with the teaching and withhold other teachings that would not address that because they wouldn't be useful at that point. Locale is the same way. He goes into locale basically saying that when the seasons change, everything differently sprouts up. Everything gives birth to the myriad things, winter, fall, spring. But the locale itself is really indifferent to all of this. It's just there. And there he says the Buddha Dharma is just this way, and he does other examples. I wanted to read this passage. This is a comment, if you don't mind, we'll go another 5 minutes or so. Yeah, since it's not snowing, we can gather Dharma flakes in here. Master Wa, I read his commentary on this, and it's really struck me, and I want to share it with you because I'm trying to, why did he say this? At this point, to this part of the text, he says, the text in this chapter is tremendously important and meaningful. It's especially helpful to people who are studying the Buddha Dharma. Everyone should take time out of their busy schedules and come to listen to the principles of this chapter. Lazy people in particular should stop being lazy and diligently cultivate the Buddha Dharma. Now, you know, it's like, okay, so this is medicine at the time in that assembly, but maybe it still has some purchase. You know, I just read it out. This passage directly explains why people fail to realize the way. It's all because of laziness. And since they are not vigorous, they cannot realize the way. Those who are attached to erudition, everybody knows erudition, right? Sort of advanced degrees and scholarly pursuits, are also that way. So he's saying, there in this, it's very interesting, there's a certain vigor that really is not leading you to accomplishment. Even erudition per se can be an obstacle to attainment. So go back to this heart-mind cultivation. Often erudition, sort of knowledge gathering, is actually a deflection of direct encounter with oneself. And so it keeps everything sort of at arm's length. And it also relies on other authorities rather than your own authority, which is the sound of your own heart-mind as you face who you are and what you're doing. So he brought up erudition here. I suppose he could have said also not studying. Could be the same way, but here he mentions erudition. And then he says, no matter how busy and hectic your day is, all of you should come here to study the Buddha Dharma. So, an exhortation. So what I was thinking of, and then he would use this expression, he says, you come to the mountain of jewels, but you can go away empty-handed. So, and that would be referring to laziness. But I have another side of that, or you come to the mountain jewels and you try to grab them all. So you don't take any, and you just sort of look at them, or you try to grab them all. You jump from one to the other. if you know what I mean. And so well, the way I ran into it when we were traveling in Asia was the refuge ceremony was given where you formally become Buddhist and you take refuge with the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha. If you're doing the mind ground refuge, you take refuge with what is enlightened in you, the Dharma, what is true in you, and the Sangha, what is pure and whole in you. So you do the internal and external. And then you often take the 5 precepts. And people would come there and they'd have in their bags 7, 8, 10, 20 little red refuge books. And it was like they were collecting refuge. So they'd come, the last teacher was in 3 weeks ago, they took refuge there, got their whole thing, they put in a bag. Master Wa comes, they take refuge again. And like you're collecting baseball cards or something. And it was really, Master Wa said, taking refuge is not a quantitative thing, it's a qualitative thing. You just do it once and then cultivate it. Adding more is like greed. What are you taking refuge in then? So he kind of criticized that. And he says, enter one, when one connects, they all connect. So whatever Dharma door you're practicing. But what often happens is we don't pick up any, or we pick up one and we do it for a little while and then we drop it. Then we pick up another one and drop it. And then we go to this place and try that for a while. Then we go to that place and try. And basically, as the text said, it's sort of like you're trying to start a fire rubbing sticks. So you rub this one and it gets a little warm and it doesn't work. And you go to another one and you go around and you just have all these sort of half-cooked sticks, but you never really penetrate. So the point of this is if you really can understand what Dharma's for, you take one and you really drill. You really stay with it. Now, how do you know which one to take and to drill with? That's a whole nother question. But from my own experience, I would say it may not be the one you like. It may not be the one you're most fond of or most resonates with you. So you have to be a little careful there because often the Dharma we choose to cultivate is M&Ms rather than medicine. It's like my niece when I get a bag of trail mix and there's M&Ms in there, and I hear her in the kitchen, I think, oh good, she's got a healthy thing going there. Here we are up in Maine, and she's got trail mix going. And I come, and pretty soon all that's left is peanuts, raisins, and everything else. All the M&Ms are gone. So, yeah. Anyhow, you don't want to be like that with Dharma doors. But anyway, so I wanted to share with you another passage from the Bowing Journal. I said I've been doing that. We've been working on it more. These are all coming from basically the winter of '79. We're between Santa Cruz and San Francisco at this point, and that was a bitter cold winter, winter of '79. But I wanted to share this because it's an individual who came up who just grabbed one Dharma and really appreciated it. So here, I just read from the writing. A man stops, bows, and asks me, I've stopped 3 times now. Could I bow along behind you for a while? So he saw us bowing, he just stopped. 3 times he stopped. He went, first time he looked, went. This time he said, and I asked him, are you sincere? Because I didn't want, someone just clowning around, really. So are you sincere? He said, oh, yes, nodding his head. I said, okay, if you're sincere, then you're welcome. And he said, how do you do it? He said, I think I got it, but I explained it to him. And about a half an hour later, I stopped to adjust my knapsack and then noticed a car full of really rude, threatening men pull up alongside the visitor who was bowing while he bowed with closed eyes and folded hands. He was really stunningly absorbed in what he was doing. And they hurled jeers and insults and taunts nonstop at him, just insulting him. If I do, we have to go beep, bleep, bleep. You have to bleep out what they said to him, right? It was nasty. And he paid no attention to them. And they just continued bowing. Finally, they pulled out with a school of rubber and sprayed him with a thick cloud of dirt and dust. Just pulled in front of him and spun their tires and threw it back at him, and he just came up from his bow, kept going. Then the car turned around and came speeding back towards the visitor, and they let fly a full can of beer. It smashed on the ground, exploding in a violent impact inches from his head. He didn't even flinch. I was witnessing this. And just before leaving, he bowed the whole day with us. He puts his palms together and he says, could you teach me how to recite Guanyin Bodhisattva's name? And I said, sure. Namo Guanshi Yin Pusa, Namo Guanshi Yin Pusa. And he goes, Namo Guanshi. Is that right? I said, yeah, that's right. He says, thank you. I'll come back again, he says with a big smile. And I was like, that bottle, can of beer could have killed him. Coming at that velocity from a speeding car, if it hit his head. And yet, he didn't move. Why he didn't move, I can't explain, but there was something more satisfying and more rewarding in fear releasing from that practice that he got into. I was in awe and admiration. I'd been bowing for a long time, and I still didn't have that skill to be that unmoved by something like that happening. Well, you could say he was dumb and stupid. This was not some kind of dumb, naive guy. He was just almost like totally took advantage, carpe diem, carpe dharma, seizing the dharma of the moment. And this comes from the Avatamsaka prologue. It says, the sages do not always respond. They respond only to adequate sincerity. When one's profound and deep sincerity reaches the ultimate point, one attains the aid of the Buddhas. This is from the Avatamsaka prologue. So I just shared that he came, he watched this, he just got one dharma, bowing, and he just went into that deeply to the point that he forgot a lot of things and found something that was and wanted to come back and return to it. And probably in between he was going to use Guanyin Pusa. So if you do bowing, you got Guanyin Pusa. What else? You know, I mean, anyhow, I'll finish. This is the entry. End of the day, frost and bone-penetrating chill descend because it would get dark early. And often that fog would come in. Yeah, it's in the 30s, 20s and 30s. With the short winter daylight hours and cold weather, we find little opportunity or incentive to bathe and shave. I tried it one day, tried to heat up some water, put it on Heng Sure's head, then I had a straight edge razor to shave his head. And by the time I got the blade there, the water was cold, it was all stiff again, and all that would happen is I'd cut. Those of you who have ever shaved, yeah, well, come on, my sister shaved, men shaved, they all shave. If you don't have some soapy worm, especially this kind of stuff, the blade just catches, right? So I finished shaving him, but he had all this blood and cuts all over his head. And it's like, okay. So I said, we lost the incentive to bathe and shave. And then I'm just getting in the car cold. I maybe threw a little water in my face to rub it. And someone shouts from a passing car, have you washed in the blood of Jesus? And I said, I was being kind of on the edge a little bit. I said, we're so busy bowing, we haven't had time to wash in anything, not even water. And they went on. That was the end of that encounter. So I will try, usually on Friday, to bring more of these to you because it's just kind of fun to see where we young, naive, unsmelted cultivators were on the bowing pilgrimage. But sometimes with these that are coming, there's just a lot more encounters with people that are recorded. So you get a kind of a slice of spirituality on the coast of California in the late 1970s too. Good and bad, all of it mixed together. But anyhow, don't be lazy, come back some more. Don't come to the mountain and leave empty-handed. And then try to, if you can, pick up a Dharma door and really practice. The first one I'd highly recommend is precepts. If you can really start to hold the precepts physically and mentally, eventually the swelling of support that comes from them will make meditation much easier and move that, advance that along. And as that advances along, the insights will just come, even if you don't want them to. If you just really diligently do that. You sort of lose yourself in the way in that sense, and when you lose yourself in the way finds you, sort of. Anyhow, enough for tonight. No questions, right? No questions? I knew if I waited long enough. Mask, mask. You start with the external. For example, refraining from killing, okay? So that external would mean you don't kill people. But then you start looking at what other life am I taking? Because it's not just about people, it's about living beings. So then you start to look at what you're consuming. Am I consuming things that rely on the exploitation or even the taking a life of other living beings? And so you pull it back a little. Then you start looking at your diet. What am I eating? Am I eating things that come from the exploitation, abuse, and death of living beings, and try to reduce your footprint in that way? But then the text is very clear. Before a thought of killing, there's thoughts of hatred. So hatred doesn't have a necessarily an external form. It can be in the heart of the mind. And then you start to go at that level. You're holding the precept against killing by reducing your hatred and anger, which is a prelude to the outburst of killing. And then you go back into like, well, it gets down to aggression. And you start to reduce your aggression. And it gets to this competitive fighting thing. It's not necessarily killing, but it wants to have victory over and defeat others. And then it can get back to, basically it'll start getting back to a sharp distinction between self and others. So eventually holding the precept of killing takes you back to anatta, no self and no others. And that is where the precept then becomes a great compassion, and it's no longer an external restraint, but it's an internal flowering. And when full compassion is there, then even the thought of the impulse to kill or to harm or to compete or defeat and so forth can't possibly arise. So it's like the raft. You use it, you start, but you move your precepts from external to internal to the most subtle. In the Confucian text, in the Dashui, it says you go back to investigation of the smallest of matters, the stirrings of your heart and your feelings, often when you're alone with yourself. And just look at what's running the machine. What are the feeders of this me? And eventually, when you get to that and you start cleaning them up, the precepts will hold themselves. But if you don't start by the most gross, and that's killing, stealing, but there's also stealing, maybe taking more than you need. It's not necessarily against the law, but it's a form of theft. So that's why you reduce, it's called giving as opposed to stealing, giving by reducing your share. This is an external to an internal. So you're not actually stealing, but you are in that you're consuming more than you actually would need. And by reducing that, it's a kind of holding the precepts against stealing. But it's going from the gross and the explicit to the more subtle and implicit, finally down to the first stirrings of your thoughts. This is how you can use the precepts to really enter prajnaparamita. At first, they just seem like a bunch of rules and thou shalt nots. But after a while, they become almost like your good friends, your best buddies. And they deliver. That's the nice thing. And with them, you're no longer cooking sand. You're cooking rice and getting rice. Sorry, that's true. I'm quoting this wrong one. Okay, does that help? Getting old. Okay, everybody's gone. Heng Sure is back in Australia. Jinchuan and Jinwei are at Redwood Vihara. It's just us for now. Tomorrow night is Saturday night. I think there'll be a Heng Sure lecture online, right? Usually on Saturday night. And I don't know if anything is going on here at the monastery. Anybody know? There's always meditation in the afternoon and the morning. The door's open, so you can come in. I started doing that, and then pretty soon I didn't leave.